Quick disclaimer, views expressed in this interview are those of our own and do not represent any organizations we affiliate with. Thank you. Start talking about SB391.
Yeah, let's just dive into it. This bill is being brought to regulate social media companies like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and YouTube, what have you, for perceived violations of people's First Amendment speech rights, by way of, banning, blocking accounts, removing content, shadow banning, things like that, claiming that that's censorship. Is not censorship at all. Censorship is when the government tells you, hey, you can't say that. And the First Amendment right to free speech, like all other, explicit and implicit rights, is not limitless by any stretch of the imagination. There are certain things you cannot say that you have constitutional protections to say.
Yeah, you're definitely right on that. So I guess kind of going off of that, like who do you think would be benefiting if this bill passed, or kind of who's losing out if this bill passes as well? Like,
yeah. So this is one of those bills that comes along that doesn't have a lot of strong institutional support. Like there's not really an industry that's behind this, that wants this, because to be clear, big tech, so-called, hates this and will fight this in the courts and through the legislature as long as it's there. And they have shown up to that effect. They have sent in their representatives and their lobbyists to say, this is, entirely unreasonable, and this is not at all the meaning of a First Amendment protection. Senate Bill 391, is it would add 10 permanent staffers to the Public Service Commission, which right now has 20 employees and the commissioners. So we've been increasing the size of the Public Service Commission by 50%. And not to the people who would benefit from something like this. I mean, ultimately, there's too many constitutional problems with this overall, because it's trying to put a state agency in charge of regulating multi-state, multinational big tech companies that have no interest in being regulated in this way, by the Public Service Commission, which regulates energy and utility companies in Montana. They don't regulate media by any stretch of the imagination, and asking them to do so is, to put it kindly, bizarre.
Is this just something being brought up in just Montana, or would you be surprised, or do you expect it to kind of branch out to other states? If this bill does kind of pass, and this is something that the public commission kind of does pick up, and it's something they are now regulating, granted it's not really in their defined boundaries, would you expect other states to kind of follow suit?
I would be, I wouldn't be surprised to see legislation like this coming down the pipeline in other states, and I believe it is, because the thing to remember about the 2020 election is, Joe Biden won, and the Democrats had their victory lap around that, and around the fact that they just barely have the votes to pull off things in the Senate. And, one of the things that I am always saying to folks is a lot of change, more change happens the more local you get with your government. So on the left want to, have their Biden victory lap. Republicans did win big in 2020, and they held their ground in a lot of places. And those folks are feeling empowered. And so, yeah, there are other states that are looking at, fighting back against companies like Facebook and Twitter. That now, if this passes, bills like this are very, anytime that you start bringing up First Amendment protections, eventually you're going to have to get the federal judiciary involved. And they, the judiciary has drawn a pretty clear line on what it views as censorship. And, there are, on the other hand, though, there's a lot of interesting questions to be asked about, what exactly is curtailing and should curtail the power of big tech companies like Facebook and Twitter, because they wield extreme amounts of influence on American society and the economy.
You've already covered kind of the history of the issue, but I guess just kind of playing out in Montana, how do you think it's realistic if this bill were to pass? How is this specifically an issue in Montana, or how do you see it playing out in Montana?
I I don't see this bill passing. I would be shocked if it did, and it would have a very short shelf life before some of the opponents brought suit against it for uh, infringements upon the ability of private companies to regulate content on their own websites. Um, about the points that they're trying to make, like that Facebook is a monopoly, for instance, that it's the only place where you can really do Facebook, so to speak. Well, then the counter argument, which has been brought up by Democrats in the Senate Energy and Telecommunications Committee, is like, well, no, Facebook is just one part of the market sector that is social media. You've got your Facebook, you've got your Twitter, you've got your YouTube, you even have your MySpace, heck, you even have your Tumblr, where those views, get into the area of criminal activity and illegality and violence against other people, depending on the stringency of enforcement, content's removed or blocked, banned, reported, what have you. Like, we can look at this and say, no, the First Amendment was, designed to limit the actions of government in curtailing freedom of speech. It has nothing to do with private entities, private individuals. But having grew up in rural America and like knowing like the kinds of language that you use around these issues, those are the talking points that make sense to the people that are being represented by this. And it being made is like, there's not a lot of strong regulation of these big tech companies that control vast amounts of data and personal information.
This kind of sounds like this bill is kind of like more short-sighted in the sense of it's not really thinking like long-term, kind of what these actions are going to be like taking place. But I guess that kind of being said, do you think bills like this coming up are kind of like sowing the seeds for kind of like this like rhetoric to continue, like not even just going forward, but especially into like the 2024 and possibly even later elections?
Absolutely. I mean, like, the Republican Party built a pretty robust propaganda machine. Like, that's the only word for it. And all the moving pieces of that are still in place. I mean, because Democrats aren't telling a good story right now. Like, the left has a very the nice way of saying it is, the American left wing has a great habit of critical thinking and critiquing like its own internal structure and like asking themselves like, hey, who are we? Like, what is our actual platform? What do we support? To what extent are we progressive? To what extent are we liberal? Like, where do we want to compromise? Where do we want to stand firm? The American left is very divided and has been for a very long time, and they don't have a unified narrative about who they are. You want to tell the story that makes people feel good and feel included, and like they have a stake in the game and a stake in the success of the administration and of the party. Democrats are not good at that, and certainly not in Montana. Like, we will see more bills like this, even if they fail, because ultimately the Republican story is being told better than the story that Democrats aren't telling. If we want to correct course and like actually focus on what is true and did happen, and hold politicians accountable to reality, really we need more young people in politics, and we need more storytellers in politics.
So Nevin and I agree on this point of that the issues being brought up in the bill are pretty much a non-issue. There are currently no First Amendment violations being seen by Facebook or Twitter, as they are private entities and not governmental organizations, which the First Amendment does not apply to. There are some good points brought up in it, however, such as there being no larger regulations of media conglomerates. With that being said, I think a good alternative policy would be a bill that more directly calls out big media on a national and not state level, which might bring about some more regulatory functions and maybe clear up some confusion and kind of some distrust that some sides and some people do have towards some of these bigger media outlets.